I left queer work pretty much as someone in the 90s. So it's been like 20 years. Right at the moment when I saw, I mean, there was two things happening at the same time. Once is I had spent about 10 years being part of these like really both awesome and very painful fightbacks against right-wing anti-gay attacks, in particular the kinds of attacks that were mobilizing communities of color and where white racist right-wing folks were playing upon the real misery, suffering, and concerns of working class communities of color, right, and using that and using long-term homophobia, using that against the sort of the gay rights agenda. And in that context, I spent a lot of time trying to help mostly white LGBT activists rethink their response to that as not just being one, to not moralize communities of color that, you shouldn't be rolling with those folks, but also to not just have it be a defensive response that says, no, but gay rights are really important and ignores the need to be organizing working class people around the issues of poverty and the very conditions that were making it possible, making it possible for the right to organize in the first place, right? So I've spent a long time doing that, and during that period is when so many queer organizations got more funding, became more established. HRC became like this big organization. And when I first came out, I don't think anybody even ever knew who they were. It was still fairly small. And the degree to which that the sort of institutionalization, non-privatization, took out the liberation politics, was part of taking out the liberation history and politics from our movement, was part of taking out the base building, movement building, essence of a lot of the movements for the 60s and 70s, and just opened the door to the corporate both the corporate organization of those actual organizations, but sort of the corporatization of the funding and the framing and everything about the gay movement. And it was very painful to watch how conservative our organizations were becoming. And I honestly couldn't have imagined this moment then. Like, I couldn't have imagined how much more conservative. When I came out, people sort of talked about like, oh yeah, that would be really crazy if our movement ended up spending a lot of energy fighting for the right to get married or fighting for the rights of queers to like go kill people around the world. But that's what happened. And so I kind of came into the movement before those became the dominant fights. And I don't identify the non-privatization as the cause, but as a way of talking about part of the trend that happened, for me, when I left queer-focused work, or what I would call single issue work, in the 90s, and decided to focus on grassroots organizing communities of color, I took the things that I had seen and witnessed, the most problematic parts of sort of this very narrow kind of single issue, build a nonprofit institution, that kind of politics I had witnessed in the LGBT rights work. I took that consciousness with me and have worked hard to both help to build, expand, and link up nonprofit organizations who are doing base building work, but to be as grounded in real community struggle and as accountable to working class communities as is possible, given the contradictions of the nonprofit form. So I felt like I've spent about 20 years trying to figure out how can you be in that nonprofit form and yet still be not be accountable to funders and not be accountable to corporations. How many queer organizers like myself have just made that decision to like focus our work in these organizations that are very intersectional but are rooted in working class communities of color, is exciting, because it means increasingly, like, we're in these working, organizations, like my organization, we organize working class Black and Latino folks, and the policy agenda isn't a queer rights agenda. but the ways in which we were able to help people make links between criminalization of queer people, criminalization of immigrants, criminalization of poor Black youth, for example, like to be able to have those conversations in that space, to me that's where more of our work needs to go, is where the queer politics are being integrated at that point, and not just at the level of like coalitions where, you know, like the Black community organization forms a partnership with the queer, you know, around which is so transactional. It's like, well, we're going to support you, as opposed to we're building leaders together who are developing an integrated and intersectional analysis together. And so the kind of fights it's not going to be a quid pro quo kind of situation, you know? So like in my organization and a lot of those organizations, there's queer young people of color who are coming up, and because it's such a pro-queer space, they're like, this is my spot, even though it's like their queer youth center, even though it's not a queer organization. And it just naturally happens if they're in a meeting and there's something going down with queer students at their high school where they ask the parents for support, who are not parents of, they're not there because they're parents of queer kids. They're there because they're just parents in the community. And the parents are like, they have genuine relationship with them. They've been through all these political education systems. And they're like, of course, we're down. You know, it's not like I don't want to say it's that simple. But, do you know, like that to me is what's in, that's the kind of organizing that's inspiring to me.